Hey guys, got a really special guest, great friend of mine, Tony Ricci. Tony and I met probably about 8 years ago, maybe, or around there at Gleason's Gym in New York.
Yeah, I think that's about right now. We're talking, gosh, we're in 21 already, Mark. So we're
I
probably
know,
saying
time just
15,
just like
yeah, you got it. 8 years, my friend.
yeah. Tony was training Heather Hardy, and I was in there working with Yuri Foreman, and we got to strike up a friendship. And for me, I'm going to let you speak about your background and all your accomplishments and your education, your background's it's a little bit much for me to remember all your accolades because there's so many and they're all great. But it really is a pleasure of mine to have you as a friend because we're both involved in combat sports, but also we've been involved in other sports as well. So maybe why don't you give us a little background, a little Tony Ricci story here.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, very much. And I guess for me, it is largely fight sports that I've involved myself in most because I had the fortune of growing up, and you would know this even better than I, in one of the greatest boxing eras ever, right?
Yeah.
So even though, I was a little young to watch Ali in his prime, but certainly caught his later years, and I had the wonderful experience with Marvin Hagler being my favorite athlete of all time, and growing up in the 80s and watching Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, and Duran. So boxing was a big love of mine from a very young age. And that brought me into fight sports and athletics. And then subsequently, too, I was a commercial fisherman. That's my family's business. So I worked my tail off and really didn't have time to do interscholastic sports, which I wish I did. But I would go do a little boxing at a little local rec, and judo was my thing, and martial arts, So at a young age, fell in love with sports. And by the time I was in 12th grade, I figured, I'm going to stay with it. And I was looking around and trying to learn, wanted to go to college, and they had this thing called exercise physiology, which was very new at the time. And most people looked at me when I told them I was going to major in it. And what are you going to do with that? But I decided to go on, be an ex-phys major, Mark, and then fell absolutely in love with human performance and continued to have a passion and love for fight sports, wrestling. And then, MMA starts to come on the scene. And while I have been involved in other sports, those are my love, and did a lot of the training myself and continue. And then one thing I just found quickly to let you know, as I became an exercise physiologist, later on, I said, I know physiology, but man, I don't know enough about nutrition. So I went back to school and, did a nutrition master's, then a sports science master's. And then I had a job that was willing to pay for more education. So I did a doctorate in health science and nutrition science. And then to sum it all up, what happened is after about 20 years of being in fight sports as a coach, I started to realize, wow, I've watched athletes give everything they have, train really hard, do everything well. And then come fight day, it all collapses. I better go to school for sports psychology. So, and I finish a doctorate in that, and that's pretty much my career,
That's amazing. So you've really covered every aspect of it's holistic. You got strength, exercise, phys, psychology, nutrition, and you have a background in the combat sports. So there's really nothing left that really needs to be covered. So when you go to Tony Ricci, you got everything you need as a combat fighter for sure.
Yeah, I hope so. I think, Mark, it isn't necessary for us to have an in-depth understanding of everything, right? Like, I'll never know how to teach anybody boxing skills to your extent, but by being around it, I have a global picture, an understanding of the requirements, right? I can't be an expert in every discipline, but in order to be an effective coach, you still want to have an understanding of everything that goes on. And I think you take a look at like somebody like in football, whether you like him or hate him, Belichick was a great coach. The guy knows everything that goes on the field, right? It's not like, hey, you're a defensive coach. He knows everything about the game despite having the other coaches. So I really love it so much. And I think they're just wonderful sports. And I'm so enthralled with them that I wanted to get that global understanding of everything,
I think the most important thing is passion.
Yes.
And that you certainly have. And I like to think I do too, because I took a very unlikely route to the National Hockey League as a strength and conditioning coach. And, when you think about it, and because my son, Sean, played hockey, he fought as well, and he wanted to be an NHL strength coach. And I said, Sean, listen, it's a great aspiration, but I was really lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. There's only 30 strength coaches on the whole planet in the National Hockey League. So it wasn't that I was better than the other thousands and thousands of people that wanted to be a strength coach. I just happened to have a door open, and I was able to present myself in a fashion that I satisfied their needs.
Okay.
And it was the passion. And the same thing, Tony, I didn't play in the National Hockey League. I didn't even play professional hockey, but I love the sport. And like you, I took what I could have, my strengths, and put them into a position that they could help a professional or any hockey team, any hockey player. So I think the passion is really what, and this is why you and I have struck up such a good friendship, because we both have that passion, we understand that it fulfills us to help athletes come along and become successful.
You're exactly right. And that passion drove you to learn the game and understand hockey and understand boxing. And it's really great because passion drives you to become better. And I don't want to say it's effortless, Mark. I don't want to downplay how much work we put in, but because you love it, you can't wait to know more and get better at it, right? Yeah. And that's how you did that with hockey. And and that's the same thing. Like people say, well, as a strength coach for fighters, are you a fighter wannabe or whatever? No, it has nothing to do with that. I could have fought if I wanted to. I don't know if I would have been any good. Probably in MMA, I was training really hard. It probably would have been okay. But my point to that is I have a love for the physiology, the fascination, right, of what goes on in the ring in the human body, right? And I want to learn it, and I want to take a young athlete, just like you with hockey and boxing, who aspires to achieve great things, and just give him a little hand doing it. That's it.
Absolutely. I've the past year or two, for 2 years now, I've been practicing Filipino martial arts, which is, I wish I really had started this much earlier, Tony, because it's such a beautiful art. I mean, there's such a great history behind it, culturally. So it's a fascinating history and culturally very fascinating, but it's a great martial art. And it's really a combat art because it was designed specifically for combat, right? It's not a sport. There's no competition. I mean, they do some stick fighting, but it's not really like, so you have, judo is in the Olympics and you have karate, and they're they're tremendous martial arts. Mm-hmm. But this is not, there's no competition. This was strictly designed because they kept getting invaded, and they had to fight. But my point is that, and especially with COVID, when I tell you I've read, I don't know, a dozen or more books specific to the mindset, the psychology of combat, the psychology of it, the whole concept of myelination and how we acquire skill.
Great.
And all those things that's you're the doctor. I'm just a layperson, but I'm doing my best, Tony, trying to understand what I'm reading. And it's
you're doing it well because you're hitting on the right points.
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate that I've been involved with some people that do law enforcement seminars to train them on weapon retention, knife defense, and things of that nature. And I've done, like I said, I've done a deep dive on how to translate what I know to a group of 20 to 30 men and women in a couple of hours, so that they leave at least with a basic understanding of a skill set that they can apply out on the street on their job. So it's fascinating, and it's a passion too.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, you fooled me because not intentionally, but just a compliment. So when I was in Texas, I lived there many years. I trained, I was there for 12 years, and it was great. I was like in the middle of Carlos Machado's jiu-jitsu. I trained with a guy named Ron Browning, who was a former pro boxer. Mm-hmm. And then you had Guy Mezig, all these guys, like it was all in one place. But Remy Priestis, who has passed away, was a great Filipino Arnis stick fighter. So he would always come to our gym. And so I have a little bit of an eye for it. I thought you were doing this for 20 years. So I thought this was a discipline that was not new to you.
You know what? I happen to have really great instructors. My guru, Royce Ramos, is amazing. His Grand Tuhan Mel Tortal is over in the Philippines, but we do these Zoom seminars, which are tremendous.
Yeah.
Because I can go back, I can refer to them. I have them on my computer. I can go back and look. And I'm a visual learner, so I like to break down video, and I learn it in thirds. So whatever the particular movement is, I'll learn the first third, then I'll work on the second third, then I'll work on the last part until I get a really good feeling for it. That's how I learn. I mean, I was one of those guys when I played hockey. You could stand there, Tony, and draw up a play, and I'm just going, it's meaningless. I would be like the fifth guy in line. I go, okay, now I got it. When I saw a couple guys skate the drill,
Right.
But in any event,
fascinating. Yeah.
The boxing footwork and really shorten the learning curve to a
I would
certain
imagine.
extent. Yeah. And certainly when it's empty hands, and even in the blades and the sticks, it really helped. But what I want to talk to you in particular today about is I'm fascinated with your training methodology and how you break it down specifically to all your education in terms of the physiology, the psychology, and also what I really love is the specificity. And I think that's something that's overlooked a lot, and I'll give you just my global kind of vision on it. So, and I've done it for years. We use the ladder drill. And then one day I'm sitting there going, how is that specific to skating? How is that specific to boxing? Because I'm not going to do a karaoke when I'm boxing.
Yeah.
I'm going to tangle my feet up and take a digger. But when I watch what you do, it's amazing the amount of thought you put into it to make sure physiologically, psychologically, and specifically it is to whatever your goal is in that particular training protocol.
Yeah, you hit it, Mark, and I don't. So we need not neglect. I think sometimes people think if you go to that type of specificity, you're neglecting some foundational established, strength principles or, and even as the example of the ladder, it's a great warm up, right? But then there comes a point where you have to say, well, how do I make this ladder more conducive to pivoting or in boxing or, and I don't understand skating, or how do I make it specific to stopping in skating or changing direction, right? And that's what, where we try to take it. So I've always said that in boxing or MMA, all fighters, this is particularly true in MMA because it's so multidisciplinary, all fighters need the same biomotor qualities. They need the same abilities, but they don't all possess those abilities equally.
Right.
So, right, because that could be genetic, that could be training, that could be one guy. In terms of pure boxing, maybe one guy was brought up in a Mexican style of boxing, and another fighter was brought up in Joe Frazier's style, and you would have to, as a skills coach, learn maybe to integrate both or find what's best. As performance coaches, I have to look at the qualities that athlete has and say, okay, in terms of MMA, they've been a stand-up fighter their whole life. As an example, they're good on their feet. They'll probably have, if they were a kickboxer or a boxer, much better peripheral vision than a wrestler who has a stereoscopic vision of it, right? These are the ways we go about it. The wrestler hasn't stood up. They haven't done as much footwork laterally. A lot of footwork in wrestling, but very different. So what I'll do is, first, I immerse myself in the sport so that I'll watch a coach like you for 3 hours working with Yuri, and then I'll start saying, okay, that's how the body moves. That's how he wants Yuri to get from A to B faster. We'll do the basic strengths, and then we'll do things that may be specific. And you might come to me, Mark, and say, my fighter's got plenty of power, fatiguing quick, though. Okay, then there may be some ways I can help you augment their physiology, right? Which would be totally different than somebody who could throw 500 punches but can't knock a milk carton over, right?
Right.
So that's what we have to look at. And that's how I try to do it, because to your point in closing on this note, I'm not just building the physical quality. If I have a stand-up fighter and entering MMA, I have to build up their belief in their capacity to survive on the ground.
Right.
By doing certain things that they can kind of translate, whether it's a horizontal hip thrust, okay, I've done some work here. I'm putting in the time. I'm getting more comfortable on the ground. So we're building the physical qualities, but we're building the belief in those qualities too. Because if they don't have that, throw the qualities out the window, right?
So there's two things. Lee Morrison, who is over in England, British dude, interesting guy. He was a street kid. He grew up on the streets. As he would put it, in British terms, I got into some nefarious activities. Right? Yeah. But he got into martial arts when he was about 15, and it kind of kept him from complete nefarious activities.
Right.
And he ended up working the doors, which is their term of being a bouncer. And he worked the really rough clubs in the poorer part of London in particular. But he used it as his lab. He used it as a lab to say, well, this works, this doesn't work.
Right.
Which is really cool. But now he's and I'm going back, he's probably about 55, 56 years old now. And he does what he calls urban combatives. And he's in that realm, he's very well known, very well respected. And he's got a couple of quotes, and I'm big on quotes. I don't live and die by them, but there's some that I really like. And he says, it's as it relates to combat, it's not how strong you are, it's how long can you be strong.
There you go. Exactly.
Isn't that amazing? That's a great way to put it.
Replicable power,
yes,
speed, and ability. You got it, right?
Isn't that amazing? That's a great saying. Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's the whole key.
And what I particularly am fascinated, Tony, by your work is your ability to take the basic. So take a deadlift. Like in fact, I saw you the other day doing the plate grip.
Yes.
But you used it in a fashion that was really explosive when you did your bounding up there. And those are the things that fascinate me, because that's kind of like my thought. I'm not as profound as you are in that, but I kind of sometimes do that with my hockey players and fighters as well. But can you expand upon that a little bit, your whole thought process there?
Yeah, well, okay. So obviously, I think in most cases, right, Mark, when you're training your boxers, okay, or you're training your strength coaches, your hockey team, the specificity of some of the conditioning, right, is going to come from the sport itself. We know that. But then if we simplify strength too much, so to the point, okay, I did a deadlift for 3 reps, and what that did is it increased my strength, and now I got to wait 5 minutes so that I get complete recovery and and get the neural drive again on the next deadlift. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. But nobody, you can't take a round off in boxing and say, well, I threw 3 punches, now I'm going to take 3 minutes to get full recovery, right?
Right.
So what will happen is we will look, and rationally, we're not talking about specificity where you're having a guy just punch with dumbbells and do crazy things. But what we have to look at is it's Lee, you said, right? His quote?
Yeah. Lee Morrison.
Yep. We have to, so replicable power. So in the case of what I did the other day, we have something in strength and conditioning called post-activation, right? Potentiation. What does that mean? You do a heavy movement like a hex bar dead, and then you unload it, right? And then you go jump, and then the body thinks it's still going to use heavy weight, so you over-recruit muscle fibers. That's post-activation.
Right.
But what I was saying, though, is we know post-activation kind of works, but I was kind of joking and not joking. In sports, you don't start loaded and then go unloaded. You whether you're boxing, whether you're wrestling, you go from unloaded to load. So in the example of what I was doing in that video, what I did for those who didn't see, I did plyometric jumps first and then grabbed the weight. The context was, well, if I'm in MMA, I'm going to be moving me first, jumping, avoiding punches, avoiding the shot, and then have to go with absolute strength when I tie up with my opponent, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, is there science behind that? Well, not unequivocal, but if the fighter gets it, there's my replicable power, right? I jumped, I pre-fatigued my legs. I'm tired. Now I got to be strong. And you still use good form. You still use good, sound training concepts, but you're preparing them, I think, not only physiologically or biomechanically a little bit more appropriately, you're getting them here. Oh, yeah,
that's my thing. When I talk to people about training, we talk about muscular system, we talk about the structural strength that you have in terms of your bone density things, but often, except when we're speaking to someone like yourself who's a doctorate and understand, the neurological system is so overlooked when we talk about training. And to me, it's the most. I think it's almost, in fact, more important than your muscular system.
Totally.
Because if I can't fire those motor units and utilize that strength, it's meaningless to me.
Absolutely correct. And who fires the motor unit?
Correct. Yeah. And not knowing specifically what I was doing years ago, but I used to have guys do a heavy set of 5 squats, step to the side of the rack, and give me 12 knee tuck plyometrics right after. Because my thought was, you work your strength. Now I want to see you be explosive with that.
That's right. Right. So
in
hockey translation, you forecheck against the boards, you tie up. Right. Now we got to go explode down the ice, right? So
hockey is constant stops and starts, and starts. So you have to have that ability to go from that unloaded to loaded position and then release that energy again.
That's right. And vice versa. Unload the load, right? You're skating down the ice, and now you're going to go slam somebody into the board. Correct. So conceptually, you could work those qualities either way, particularly as, again, I think that there's rationale to say there's benefit in both. And there's certainly rationale if you're a player is saying, oh, I did this with Mark, I'm going to level this dude. Pick up speed and check him against the board. Yeah.
There's nothing more rewarding for an athlete you're training when they see something they've been doing in the gym with you or I, and they see how it translates to their sport. And it's so important that happens because, they got to buy into what we're telling them. They have to buy into what we're putting together for them, and that's another big part as a strength coach. You got to explain to the player, you're doing this because this is going to be the end result.
Perfect.
Right. And, here's another thought I've had, and I kind of go back and forth with it, but one of the big, long-standing, boxing is a long history.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I was talking to Keith Idek the other day, who's a boxing writer. I said, what's unique about boxing is it hasn't changed over the years. I mean, we're still wearing 10-ounce or 8-ounce gloves.
Right.
It's not like now. I said to him, I'm a big golf fan. I'm horrible at golf, but I love it. They had to lengthen the courses because these guys, because of the newer technology, they pound the ball a mile. So they actually had to lengthen the courses, And even in hockey, my sport, when I played, I used a wooden stick. It was kind of, now that you could rest the stick on your finger. They're a composite. They're
light.
And they whip. So they're like a rubber band.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of that whip. So, the game has changed technologically to a certain extent. Boxing hasn't. It's still a 3-minute round, a minute in between.
Great point.
Mano a mano. It's a weight division thing, and the gloves are the same. Nothing's changed, right? That said, there's a lot of old school thought and training, and it's much better now, certainly within the past 5 to 10 years.
Agreed.
But I've got into a lot of lengthy conversations as it regards to road work. I want to get your take on it. My take is this: it's an anaerobic burst. It's 3 units of work, 1 unit of rest, and if you lay out your training for conditioning and you're doing interval training, you're going to get that ancillary aerobic based help on your recovery in between your sprints. And then I kind of almost think that to say to a fighter, hey, I want you to get up every morning and give me 5 miles. I don't want to say it's counterproductive because I don't know if it's enough mileage to really have a reduction in anaerobic power and everything like that. Right. But it's a discipline thing. Your guy's getting up and he's getting his work in. But I don't know if there's really a benefit to it.
So, if you're talking in terms of pure distance, I would say this. If there were a benefit, it's certainly more in boxing than MMA. And the first reason why I say that, Mark, is a lot of my MMA guys, their knees are shot.
Yeah.
Their ankles are shot. They're getting heel hooked. They're getting takedown. So from a structural standpoint, right there, it's going to be a bigger problem from them.
Yeah, they don't need any additional pounding.
Exactly. And their time on their feet may not be nearly as long as the boxer. So from the pure rationale perspective, okay, the boxer, may go 12 times 3 for 36 minutes on their feet. Okay. You could say, all right, well, that makes some sense. However, it really is also contingent upon the complete training load, right? So if you've got your fighter in there for 3 sparring sessions or heavy rope work, heavy bed work, maybe one that would be, in my view, I like more of the interval style work you're doing. I adhere to that wholeheartedly. I think some people would argue, well, the road work is good for getting the weight off. Right. But if you're running with too much weight on, that's not good for you either. Yeah. Right. So I think road work would have some value in, like Chris Algieri likes short runs. Right. Chris would prefer to do that 3 miles and get that done in 20 minutes, as an example. And we're done. Boom. Right. And now what have you done? You've really stretched that aerobic base. You're on the border of the AT for a hard 20 minutes, which will carry over to your 36 in a fight, particularly because you're going to have the rest intervals and you can control the pace of the fight a little bit if things are going well. So I think that, to your point, just the road work and pounding the pavement for the sake of pounding the pavement can be deleterious, particularly if it's just on top of an excessive training volume already.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good.
I did. I need Beth here because she's really good with reminding me of what year was what, and she could tell you what she wore at a wedding. And yeah. So I guess it's probably maybe 10 years ago. So I did a training camp in the Poconos with Lou Duva and a good friend of mine, Sean George. And we were working with Al Mitchell, who is the U.S. Olympic coach. And we did a camp with, I think the Chinese team brought over, I want to say 4 fighters for their higher level, 4 or 6, I forget. We spent about 6 weeks in the Poconos. And they also brought their Chinese coaches. So they were kind of reverse engineering, I think.
Yeah.
They're known to do. And that's okay. But anyhow, in any event, they were dead against running. They just didn't. And the athletes hated it. The coaches hated it. So it was a little give and take. There was a little bit of headbutting there. And that's when I really started to think long and hard about it. But I like the idea that 3 mile sprint that Chris Algieri was doing.
Exactly.
It's really not aerobic because you're still at that 20-minute mark.
And you're pushing that intensity, right?
Yeah, you're really edging up on that. It's more. I don't know if you want to say glycolytic, but it's certainly more anaerobic.
Yes, it is. You're right. You're right. You want to be right on that edge, right? Yeah. Of the anaerobic threshold and aerobic, slow glycolysis and a little bit of fat burning. And, and another thing too, Mark, which is really important, is what's the age of the fighter, right? Like in MMA, if I got a 32-year-old, I ain't putting them on the road work. Right. I mean, I got guys who got such knee pain, and I would imagine you'd know better than I, but that's also a consideration in boxing. Sure. You got a guy who's been, maybe had a career from the time, a high-level career from 21 to 31. Hey, their knees may not take the beating that they did in MMA, but so what? They still take a pounding, right?
Famously, Yuri had his knee blow out against Miguel Cotto.
Exactly. Well, there you go. Right.
Yeah, we were sparring. He was sparring 30 rounds a week leading up to that fight for probably a month.
Okay,
30. We were doing Monday, Wednesday. Yeah, we were doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 rounds each day.
Yeah, wow.
And there were times when he would slip, but and when you're sparring, water gets spilled and there's a lot of sweat. And I didn't really think about it, but when it occurred in the fight, I said, "Oh my God, he had that ACL injury existing before he even entered the ring with Miguel Cotto."
Right, exactly. Right. And imagine though, if we don't know that, and what's the compounding effect of boatloads more of road work on top of all that. So I don't condemn the road work. It's also, by the way, weight class specific.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want Tyson
Absolutely.
Fury too much,
No.
versus a guy fighting at $125. There's a difference, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So particular to the weight issue, my opinion is, and I always tell my guys, look, don't ever get over 8 to 10 pounds over your fighting weight, because then you're training to make weight. You're not training to fight. What are your thoughts on that in particular?
Exactly. Or it could be a percentage, right, Mark? Because if if you have right, and I like the 10%, by the way, but 10 pounds on the if somebody's fighting welter at 47 is obviously different than 10 on somebody who's fighting cruiser. So I go generally by your percentage, right? And I think that's so here's what we'll do, like in MMA. If you fight at 185, I mean, that's it's a heavier weight, and you have the try to, I mean, I don't, they do it, but we would argue 20 pounds. What would that percentage be? So that would be about 10% over your body weight. Okay.
Right.
Well, that's right. We're not talking 2 weeks before. We're talking, 8 to, so you have plenty of time to naturally work your way down and stuff like that. So sure, I do think there's a lot of things too we have to consider. The genotype and phenotype, in my view, I've discussed this, in boxing is very different than maybe in an MMA. So for example, in order to be a good boxer, you generally want a narrow hip girdle, a little bit.
Right.
Not because if you have wide hips and a big glute, you just added 20 pounds to the scale, right? You want that leaner, long but strong leg, like a Sugar Ray or Marvelous, right? And then you want that nice that V upper body, like Hagler and
Tommy Hearns.
Hitman, right?
Yeah.
So Hitman probably in 6th grade could slap somebody from across the classroom and he couldn't touch him. So right away he knows he could be good at this. That's a different body type, generally speaking, than maybe a wrestler who went into MMA who's built more like me, and we could get heavy easy. So you're looking in many cases that, look, I know people let themselves go, but the boxing geno and phenotype from their training should be a little bit easier to maintain that close weight than a guy who's built like me or a Chris Weidman. Yes.
Not too many mesomorphic boxers.
That's exactly right.
You can be a mesomorphic wrestler for sure. You want that.
Exactly. And that's what I mean.
Muscle mass.
You got it. That's what I mean by geno and pheno, right? How are you born? And then how does you express that in training, right?
It was interesting. I was with the New York Rangers 2001. So we're talking 20 years ago already. And even then, when we went to the scouting combine, we would videotape the players just with their gym shorts on, front, back, and side, to do somewhat of a somotyping, because these are 17, 18-year-old kids. So I could look at a kid, see 6'4", 175, and say, that's fine. In 3 years or 4 years from now, he's going to be 215.
Right.
We could project a little bit,
Exactly.
So and I think in our business, it's really important that we're aware of that whole dynamic of body structure and understanding that as it relates to what particular, what are we trying to accomplish with this particular fighter or hockey player or football. Football maybe is different because it's, you get some big dudes that can really fly. I was really fortunate. I got to work with the New England Patriots for a little bit. Johnny Parker was the head strength coach up there.
Yep. I remember.
He went up there with Parcells when Parcells.
He was with the Giants earlier, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes.
He followed Bill. So Johnny Parker got a hold of Bill Parisi and I don't know if you know Bill.
I know Bill. Yep.
Yeah. And so Bill and I went up and we put together, because Johnny was a really exceptional strength coach. And he was also exceptionally bright to know, look, this isn't my wheelhouse. I'm going to bring in these guys to help me. It's really smart. Most people don't have, their ego gets in the way a little bit, right?
Yep.
So, and I got interviewed by Bill Parcells and it went well. And there's, the takeaway was, he said to me, Mark, what's your training philosophy? And I think it's just like yours. I said, my book is only an inch wide, but it's a mile deep.
Yes.
And he said, I really like that. He said, understand one thing, Mark. This is the National Football League. Your job is not to make these players better, because you can't. Maintain what they have. maintain with that. And that's what I brought to the National Hockey League when I was with the Rangers and before that in New Jersey. But I think in the combat sports, so we can make improvements. It's a little different because I don't know.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, I do. That's a really interesting comment by Bill, and who's going to argue with him, right?
Not me.
I get so gifted. It's like, but what you're doing too is by strength and conditioning them. You're, like he said, you're preserving their abilities.
Right.
Maybe injury prevention, maybe force absorption and the wear and tear. But I do agree with you that we can. I think we can augment performance in fight sports. I really do. Yeah. And particularly boxing, because what you saw in MMA too, Mark, I think is you had a lot of guys coming over in MMA from Ohio State wrestling, Penn State. They're on a formal team. You know, they have college behind them. They've had access, whether they use it or not, they've had access to an athletic trainer, a physical therapist, a registered dietitian, a qualified strength coach.
Correct.
So they come in with an understanding of science, right? Maybe they don't adhere to it, but they've heard about it. Right. And I think that network and framework of interscholastic sport and intercollegiate sport had an influence on MMA. Oh, we better use some science. Boxing has always been much more of a sole proprietor endeavor, right?
It's an urban sport, strictly an urban sport.
Exactly. Right. And you don't pull people out of the ranks of college for it.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like you did somewhat in MMA, not exclusively.
So they haven't had the exposure.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think in boxing, by the way, to me, is still my first love. I think it's the hardest sport in the world. And I'm writing a little book that is going to testify to that from a theological standpoint.
Yeah.
Fun.
All right.
Yeah. But anyway, won't take too long on it. My point to that is that, I think boxing it's really starting to get there. Like Deontay is starting to consider all this, right? My friend is his nutritionist now. And I think Anthony. Yes.
I mean, they're so.
Done. There you go. Perfect. Better example than anyone. He don't play around.
They cover it all.
Yep.
And what I really find interesting about Lomo is when he's done with his road work, his floor work, and his sparring, he goes in that back room and he's got to do mathematical.
Yes.
You know, and the puzzles, because I think that's I have two thoughts on that. One, when I was with the Rangers. In the off season during the summer, we had a bunch of guys in training, and they had this. You've seen them, I'm sure. It's an electronic board. The room gets dark, and the lights go off, and you got to hit all the lights.
Vision board. Yep.
Yeah. And you know what I found interesting? The best players that we had on a team were not the best in that room.
Oh, absolutely.
There was not really a noticeable, But I think as in terms of what they're, and I'm guessing here because I don't know exactly what their mindset is with Lomo, but I do, from my vantage point, I think what they're trying to express is in a fight and when it gets into the championship rounds and you're physically and mentally tired, more mentally tired than anything else, the ability to still be able to process.
Absolutely. Yep.
I think that's key. It's a little bit different.
Conditioning, and it's done. You know this. It's done in the military.
Yeah. Yep.
They were doing it before they knew what they were doing.
Right.
Oh, it's going to make you think after, the God bless the Navy SEALs. You're not going to sleep for 2 weeks. You're going to freeze. You're not going to eat. Yeah. And then we're going to force you to make very big life-dependent decisions.
Yeah, they call it stress inoculation training.
There it is. Okay.
They were the first ones to really extensively use that type of protocol. And it's interesting. I had a friend of mine, Bill Brown, who's a SEAL, and I had some law enforcement guys and some other military. We went up in the mountain, and we made a day of it. And I ran them through some sit. So I would, similar to what they do at Coronado Island, like we blindfold them, we spin them, get them disorientated, take them into a spot in the woods, and then we say initiate action. We rip the blindfold off, and they get attacked from different angles.
Wow.
We use mitts, so no one hopefully gets hurt. It gets a little rough. These are big, strong alpha males, but
sure.
But you know what's interesting, Tony, and I only learned this through my research. when you run 5 to 8 evolutions of that in a row on one guy, and then I say, Tony, what's your mother's maiden name? Spell it backwards. Your cognitive process is shut down because now you're completely limbic. Because of the repetition of the stress.
Right. You're out of the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah.
You're
right into the wild brain.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's really interesting stuff, but it was a lot of fun. I mean, this is the type of thing those guys they live for this stuff, but it's really productive, and I even do it in the ring. So, I'll put 5 guys in a ring. I have a guy in each corner and a guy in the middle. So you come out of your corner, we're going, I hit the whistle. You don't know which guy's coming. You got to spin. You got to go with him just to give it another flavor. I don't want to interrupt you. I think that is a splendid approach that is probably being very underutilized. Yeah, you don't see it much.
Yes, and it's the rate of processing that you're expediting, right? The visual acuity that you may be enhancing, the peripheral visual acuity, the time that it takes to make the decision. Who's coming at me, but not who's coming at me only. What are they throwing?
Right.
And what are they going to do? Right. That to me, although it's harder to measure in timing or a board, would have more domain specificity than just the vision board as an example. And what I mean by that is we've seen some studies, Mark, that go exactly to your point. You can take a Taekwondo expert, a world champ, right, and give them visual stimuli to respond to that is specific to that sport, and they're going to smoke you and I.
Right.
But if you take them out of their domain and go back to Donder's, here's a finger tap, right, every time you see a light, they don't beat anyone else all that much. Right. So the body is that specific in its adaptation. So in many ways, if that vision board would allow, which I want to get around to one, because I still want the athlete moving in order to process.
Right.
And I think what you're doing isn't good. I think it's outstanding.
Oh, thank you, Tony.
We can justify it scientifically to be an excellent approach, particularly for the boxer who is fighting 28 inches away from somebody who could throw a punch at 25 miles an hour.
And I think also what plays into it, Tony, is like maybe it's the 8th round, your left eye is shut. Now you can only see half the field. Right?
Good point.
Yeah. So there's so many dynamics that come into boxing and MMA, similar. It's not, no 2 fights are ever the same.
Great point. Wow. Yeah.
And so there's always going to be some unknown dynamic that's going to pop up.
Yeah.
And I think the more you prepare, and this is the military thinking, is I don't know if you've ever heard this one, they call it VUCA. Vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity rather.
Forgive me, that was so good. Yeah, I don't. I should know that, and I don't. So I'm taking a note on that.
That's fine. It's vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which means basically you plan, but then there's going to be unknowns.
Exactly.
And the SEALs are very specific with this because they're always offensive missions. They don't do anything defensive. Every mission they do is offensive. And there's a lot of intel. And I was talking to my friend Kenny Bigby Jr., who's a SEAL. He's also working with Jared Wahangi, who does a lot of tactical stuff. They're both martial artists. Jared was a SWAT member on Utah. He's a Tuhan and Pakiti Tersha Kali. But what Kenny says, we don't have plan B. We have a contingency plan. And it's an interesting, different way to look at it, right?
Right.
And look, I think in boxing, we had Joe Greer, who was my mentor and one of my best friends in life. We trained a ton of people together over the years. And we had a kid who was in the Golden Gloves in New York, a heavyweight. And we were fighting at, is it St. Paul's Church, Tony, near the UN building?
I think that's correct because I used to work at Pfizer Pharmaceutical right near that building.
Yeah.
So it is, yes.
So we had a fight there. Believe it or not, the Golden Gloves in a church, kind of ironic. But anyway, So you know how it goes in amateur boxing. You don't know who you get, especially in a tournament. You don't really know who you're fighting. So we get there and I see his opponent. Now the guy we had was this really big Albanian kid. He was like 6'5", big dude, right? And I look over and their guy's literally 5'9", maybe, and kind of heavy, right? So I'm smart enough to know you never underestimate anyone in this game.
Right.
So we said to Rini, that was his name. I said, Rini, look, just use your reach. When he make him come in, then drop a right hand, turn him and hit him with a hook. Well, first round, this kid came in there and boxed his ears in.
Wow.
He knew how to come under low,
Right.
jab up, throw punches up. So we had to go to, I didn't know it then, but we had a contingency plan that we put together really quick on the fly. And Rini was there. He stopped him in the second round. But that's what's unique to, I think, the boxing sport, even in the professional ranks. You can never, like, you look at some of the Mexican fighters, they're never really ripped. You know what I'm saying, Tony?
No, that's a great point.
And yet they can hit like freaking freight trains.
Rush.
And they're tough as nails.
Yes.
And then you get African American guys can be completely jacked. You look at Sean Porter. I mean, I think he had a scholarship for football to Ohio State, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow, that may be true. I know his strength coach, Larry Wade, who's a very good coach. Yeah.
I mean, I stood next to Sean at the Barclays one night when Yuri fought. And I mean, he's just a ball of muscle.
He
kind
is.
of a little bit against what we were saying before about being mesomorphic and not.
Yeah, I mean, there are exceptions, right? But yeah.
But he's figured out over the years how to use that to hit.
Exactly. Right? And how to condition with it. Yep. Yeah.
So my point again is like, and even playing hockey, I remember, so in hockey, the defenseman will post up behind the net, use the net as like kind of protection and look around where to make a play.
Yeah.
And I came flying around and the guy looked to be my size and I thought I was going to run right over him. I hit him. He didn't even move. And I just went flying 10 feet in the other way. Because you don't know. Like, you just don't know.
You don't know, exactly.
How the guy is, yeah.
Yeah. It's what makes boxing so great, though. It really does. Yeah. And, one of just to my point, Mark, is why is it, in my view, the hardest sport really in the world? Well, look, every other sport, and MMA is included in boxing, not, in my view, is hard for certain reasons, but every other sport, it's a penalty to go to the head.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've seen LeBron go to the net. He's a biomechanical art of perfection.
Yeah. Here's
the ball. Everything beautifully. Looks like a statue driving to the net. What would happen after 2 dribbles? You were allowed to uppercut him in the face, right? The whole sport's going to change.
Yeah.
The very thing you need to process, the very thing you train to learn, to suck it up, right? To plan.
Yeah.
Is being banged around like a Super Bowl or like a cork in your head.
Yeah.
And that's what makes that sport so darn tough. And then when that isn't happening, somebody goes to your liver and moves it from center right to center left, okay? And your lungs are swollen from that. And that's how you get your air in. But my point is, and yet it hasn't changed. And maybe it hasn't changed because it's the most primal, yet advanced human sport in the world,
Absolutely. And even the jump from amateur fighting to professional fighting, I mean, I know, and so many guys had tremendous amateur careers. It didn't translate to professional fighting. Then you have guys like Gabe Rosado. He had 9 amateur fights. That's it, right? And it's interesting, too, because I have a guy here that I worked with in the past, Richard Pearson. He would have had a lengthier career, but he got into the game later, and he didn't have good management. You know the game. It's not the most above board business, but
it could be tough. Yeah,
tremendous fighter. They used him in training as a sparring partner for Kelly Pavlik. He broke Kelly's nose.
Wow.
Then they used him for Aaron Pryor Jr. He broke his ribs. So
Aaron Pryor.
They didn't call Richard anymore to be in camp. But and Richard is a very extremely bright young man, but he's a street kid. And so we were sitting around in gym, and he says, "You got to understand, like, when you go from," and he only had a handful of amateur fights as well before he turned pro. He goes, amateur fights, you got headgear on, you got 12-ounce gloves, and referees protecting you. He said, and then your first pro fight, you get in there, you got these tiny little gloves on, no headgear, there's usually a lot more people. And then this is what really struck me, because you got to know Richard to appreciate this. He says, and because of the lighting, you feel like a piece of chicken in a Spanish restaurant, the piece with that light right on. And it just really cracked me up. But it just, really brought to light the difference between the professional game and the amateur game. Because the referee's not going to protect you anymore. When he sees you in trouble, you got to figure it out, buddy. I'm not going to.
Great point. Yeah.
And like my son had a fight years ago, and from my vantage point, I was working a corner. I couldn't see the hook, and the referee stopped the fight. And I'm saying, Sean, I'm happy you won, but was that really a good stoppage? He goes, Dad, the guy's eyes were rolling in the back of his head. I go, oh, I couldn't see that. But in a professional fight, the guy's on his feet. Sean could have kept it. My son could have just kept going. It's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah, Mark. And I don't, until you're around it, I don't think people understand it. And that's why couch, warriors just don't get. And I'll tell you when it dawned on me. So I've been on the sidelines of Big Ten football. And then a few years ago, I was on the sideline for a Cowboy Giant game. And you watch it on TV. And of course, everything on TV slows down incredibly, right? But Mark, and this is how people have no idea about boxing. But we are at a point in the NFL where the snap to contact is now, that's it. Here's the snap, and there's the pads. Yeah. It wasn't even just the size. It was it is so fast. And people have no idea what the hand speed is, what the proficiency is, the accuracy of a professional boxer. And, you'll get guys who will sit there and go, well, if I was fighting him, I would here's what you would just do. Actually, you'd just be knocked out in 0.00008 seconds. That's what you would just. It is. So my point to this is, it is one of the sports where when you get to it live, the chasm between what you would have seen on TV and when you see what they can do is holy beep. It is absolutely incredible.
You and I both have been intimately involved in this game at, both the amateur and professional level. And there are times, especially in a pro fight, when I'm working a corner, I'll go, as much as I love this sport, wow, this is really brutal. It's really brutal. And then I come back. But there's times when you sit there going, wow, I can't believe these are like the brutality of it all really is. I mean, what other sport, the primary objective is to concuss somebody?
It's to take a miracle, which is the human brain,
right,
and really essentially turn it into mashed potatoes.
Yeah. I
mean, it's in the end,
And I think that the other part of it is it does snatch your soul. I mean, I had a fighter. We went down to fight a guy in Washington, and we were on the undercard of Lamont Peterson and Kendall Holt. And it was a cruiserweight fight. So these are big guys. And they were both really jacked up, and they both had really good. My guy had a nice record. This guy had, and when I whether it was Yuri or someone coming up, when the management would say, "Hey, Mark, we got to fight for Tony," and they give me a name, I would go into BoxRec. I wouldn't only look at who he fought, but I would look at who he fought. I'd go 5 deep just to see the pedigree. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
This guy had a pedigree. And so I wasn't concerned, but I was aware of his pedigree going into the fight. But my guy knocked him out in the second round, devastated him. And this was in this guy's hometown of Washington, D.C.
And when was this fight? I'm sorry.
He was on the undercard of Lamont. My guy was Elvin Sanchez. Out of Patterson here. It was Lamont Peterson, Kendall Holt. Okay. So that was probably, again, I'm so bad with. I remember the year I was born when I graduated high school. Tony.
Yeah, no, I got it. That gives me some context. Yeah.
But it's probably, if I had to guess, 8 or so years ago, the fight.
Yeah.
And but the guy wouldn't come out of the locker room to see the press. My point is, he just got stripped in front of all his friends and family. There is nothing more devastating to being knocked out in an amateur or especially professional fight. You know, the whole world sees it. You know, I miss a layup. Oh, there's another 40 minutes in the game.
Yes.
I missed a foul shot, and I'm not diminishing it. I'm just saying.
No, great athletes, wonderful. Yeah. But to your point, that is the hardest. There's nothing more primal than being punched in the face.
I mean, or a knee to the face, like Masvidal did to Ben Askren.
Yeah, that was brutal too. Yeah. Exactly. I love it too. But no, I think. Go on. I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead, Tony.
No, just I think we're in love with it for that reason. Yes, the brutality, not because we want to see it, but the appreciation of what that athlete is going through amongst 100 reasons. The set mark, the challenges, but the great appreciation of what that athlete is going through.
So I have to apologize, Tony. I wanted to open up by saying congratulations. I know you just got a new position at Nova Southeastern University. Maybe you want to tell us what that great accomplishment is and what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, I'm really excited, Mark, because I'll tell you why I'm excited. We are going to put some cool stuff on paper about reaction time, force production. So I have so anyway, I will be teaching at Nova Southeastern in Fort Lauderdale, which, by the way, Florida is a great boxing state, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's people going down there to train, and so we'll have, and it's a huge MMA state now. But I'll be teaching across departments, the psychology and neuroscience department as an adjunct, and sports human performance department as full time. But the key thing is, I'm going there. If you all remember that great show, Sports Science.
Oh yeah,
and your force production or the power of a Muay Thai kick. That's what I'm going to be doing, and doing a lot of research on fight sports. So one of the things I may do is take 12 to 15 amateur level boxers, high elite level amateur, right? Measure their oculomotor peripheral vision capacity, research and compare that to, as I said, 12 Division I wrestlers.
Right. Yeah.
Now, why would that be important? Well, for those wanting to transition into MMA, we might see as an example, okay, the boxer has already this better stereoscopic vision. If we want to expedite the wrestler's ability, which of course is better tactile, and than the boxer because they don't tie up for nearly as long.
Right.
Well, now we can do drills that improve their vision more effectively, and their, the visual cortex, and that'll help them maybe with their hands in defense. I'm going to look at the reaction time of how many milliseconds do you have if you're 29 inches away from your opponent and you're throwing a punch at 25 miles an hour, right? Yeah. So my research is going to be in the fight sports, and so excited to be going there.
This brings us back to our original point. It's the passion. This isn't a job. This is not work for you, Tony. This is a playground for you, right? I mean, this is the candy store, the toy store, all wrapped up into one, right?
Look at the smile we have on our face.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, like you and I all day, Mark. We're talking together,
absolutely,
and we're getting out of our seat. It's And what is the point of it? The point of it, I'm not trying to revolutionize the training. We want to understand the physiology of what goes on in that ring. It's no different. Hey, the baseball player has 100 milliseconds to respond to a 98 mile an hour fastball. Okay. And it's going to be 25 feet away at that point. Okay, cool. Those are the things we need to discover about our game, about the fight sports.
Where this can translate in some respects is in law enforcement. There's something called the 21-foot rule. There was a lot of research that went into it. I think Tuller was the guy who did the research. And basically there's this premise. If somebody has a knife deployed, a perpetrator, and they're within less than 21 feet and they attack you, which takes about a second and a half, you don't have time to deploy your handgun. Wow. So there's been some give and take if that's an accurate, and again, it's all context driven.
Yes.
But that's a generality.
But boy, that's a long, you would think that to be a safe distance, right?
No. They're on top of you.
Like me, I would think it, yes.
And there's even, I have read research where they run it from different, 3 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, 21 feet in different again, different context. So really what it gets down to, Tony, the reduction of the 21 foot, every time it gets a little closer, depends on how quick you are able to deploy your handgun.
Right.
Which is a learnable skill set that you can get that conscious and unconscious competence level.
Yes.
Problem is, in most, because of funding and everything else, and it's a big topic now, but once most of these guys leave the academy, that's where it ends. And that's why a group of us are doing these seminars for free. There's a great guy, Mitch Aguilar, who was SEAL Team 10. He's a fighter now, MMA.
Yeah, that's why I know the name. Sure. Yep.
Yeah. And he has a great supplement company. And every time you buy his product, $1 of it goes to Adopt a Cop, which funds law enforcement to be able to go roll at a BJJ studio.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a great program. Mitch is just,
right. This benefits everybody, by the way, not just the officer, right?
Yeah. We want everybody to go home.
Exactly.
We want the perpetrator to go home alive.
Exactly.
So we don't have to draw a handgun, so that we could submit him.
Exactly.
So, again, it's our passion, Tony. And I can't thank you enough for your time. I mean, we could sit here probably for 10 or 12 hours straight, I'm sure.
All I can ask is let's do it again, Marcus.
My friend, anytime you want, Tony, I'll hit you up. You're always welcome. This was fantastic.
There's so many different things we could talk about each time,
Absolutely, without a doubt. And again, congratulations on your new post. I didn't want to go through the whole liturgy because you have so many accomplishments. It's incredible.
Yeah, I'm just getting bored. I got to do something.
Listen, my hat's off to you. God bless you. And thank you so much again, Tony. I know you're kind of hard pressed. You got a 3 o'clock appointment, but this was fantastic. Let's do it again real soon.
Absolutely, Mark. Same to you. God bless, my man. And we'll be in touch and hopefully see you before I go south. All right.
Yes, sir. Would be great.
All right.
Thanks, Tony. Be well.